is no further escalation of potential for a nuclear assault by North Korea. But does North Korea, and you and I have spoken about the grid many times over the past few years, but does North Korea have the ability to actually loft a nuclear warhead into the hemisphere in a position to inflict damage or an electromagnetic pulse and subsequent damage to our grid, which runs all of our electricity and all of our power?
Well, the head of the Missile Defense Agency here just about a month ago or a little over said very clearly in open committee before the world, not in classified setting, that we had to assume clearly at this point that North Korea had the ability to target the United States with missiles that would reach from there to here. And obviously we know now that those can be nuclear armed, which means that they don't have to be very accurate. They don't have to have a reentry vehicle. If they are detonated at the right altitude, they can indeed inflict an electromagnetic pulse on the country, which could damage our grid, and in a worst-case scenario, cascade and damage significant portions of the grid to the extent that an untold number of Americans could die. And it is very real, and it's something I think that the President knows. As you know, you worked to help us pass the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act, and now this administration is implementing that. Yeah. So the President is acting on that. And I would say one other thing. They've given the President a hard time for speaking in strong terms, but his #1 purpose as President is to protect the United States and to make sure that no fired, which would create that escalation you mentioned, is so vital. And for him to make it clear to Kim Jong-un that it's not in his best interest to do that is an important, critical foundation here, and the President is absolutely right in what he's doing in that regard.
Congressman, when you talk about a reentry of not just a nuclear warhead, but one that will affect an EMP, is there a difference in the need for precision of one versus another?
Well, you're hitting exactly on a very critical point, Judge. First of all, to affect an EMP with a nuclear blast, you don't need a reentry vehicle at all. And you don't need to be very accurate. If you can just get in the general vicinity at the right altitude, and we don't know for sure, but there may be at least there's some speculation that some of the warheads that North Korea uses may be enhanced in the area of gamma ray emission, which would mean that their EMP capabilities would be even greater. We do know that North Korea has an advanced EMP or IEMI effort, so that this is something that is not foreign to them, and they have developed that capability, so we have to be very, very vigilant about it.
EMP, electromagnetic pulse, but what's IEMI? What is that?
That's intentional electromagnetic interference, and that's where you do more of the localized effort. And the fact that that they have that capability is really a more advanced capability than even the nuclear burst, because the nuclear burst is pretty simple. It's pretty almost archaic. If you can get a nuclear blast at the right altitude, you will create an EMP. And so IEMI is a much more technologically advanced situation. That makes me think that they're well aware of what they're doing.
And frightening. But Congressman Trent Franks, thanks so much for what you're doing in Congress on the grid.
Thank you, Judge,
very important to my viewers, I must tell you. All right, thank you again. And Washington, D.C., as you can expect, reacting strongly to the terrible events in Virginia tonight. But some of the anger is being directed at the White House. More on that coming up as this 2-hour edition of Justice rolls on.
For my constipation, my doctor recommended I switch laxatives. Stimulant laxatives.
Welcome back to this special 2-hour edition of Justice. Fallout in Washington after today's horrific events in Charlottesville, Virginia. Much of the anger directed at the white nationalists whose rally touched off all this violence, but some of that anger was also directed at the president. Marianne Rafferty is live in our Los Angeles bureau with the very latest. Marianne?
Well, Judge, we're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, new tonight, Senator Ted Cruz, just within the past hour, has called on the Department of Justice to immediately investigate the deadly violence in Charlottesville today as an act of domestic terrorism. The call from Senator Cruz coming hours after a driver identified as 20-year-old James Alex Fields allegedly rammed his car into a crowd of counter-protesters at a white nationalist rally in Charlottesville. Political leaders from both sides of the aisle quick to condemn the violence and the chaos, which has reached a boiling point. President Trump speaking earlier, urging an end to the brutality and condemning hatred in all its forms.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It has no place in America. What is vital now is a swift restoration of law and order and the protection of innocent lives.
But the president also facing some criticism tonight from both sides of the aisle for his reaction, specifically the fact that he didn't mention white supremacy or the white nationalist movement in his public comments or tweets. Senator Marco Rubio tweeting, quote, "Very important for the nation to hear POTUS describe events in Charlottesville for what they are, a terrorist attack by white supremacists." And Republican Senator Orrin Hatch also taking a veiled shot at the president, saying, quote, "We should call evil by its name. My brother didn't give his life fighting Hitler for Nazi ideas to go unchallenged here at home." The president has not addressed the criticism, but says he is in close contact with Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. Mr. Trump saying he and McAuliffe agree that the hate and division must end and must stop right now. House Speaker Paul Ryan among leaders urging calm, saying in an earlier tweet, "These views fueling the spectacle in Charlottesville are repugnant. Let it only serve to unite Americans against this kind of vile bigotry." Ryan going on to say, "Our hearts are with today's victims. White supremacy is a scourge. This hate and its terrorism must be confronted." And this from Senator John McCain. "White supremacists aren't patriots, they're traitors. Americans must unite against hatred and bigotry." Strong reaction all around, but you can bet the president's critics will continue to listen very carefully to his comments on this developing story in the coming days. Judge?
All right, let's get some reaction from our panel. Joining me now, Lawrence Jones, conservative commentator and host at The Blaze, and former aide to Senator Chuck Schumer, radio host Chris Hahn. All right, gentlemen, what do you think of the call by Senator Ted Cruz for the individual, James Alex Fields, 20-year-old from Ohio, came to Charlottesville and is being charged with mowing down at least 9 people, killing one, be charged with domestic terrorism? I'll start with you, Chris.
Well, clearly he was watching our last hour when I called on that exact thing to happen. So I agree with him 100%. It is domestic terrorism, and it should be treated as such, and it should be called as such. So very rare that I agree with Ted Cruz. Very rare that he agrees with me. But, Senator, I'm with you on that.
But you know what? This is one time when we should all be in agreement with each other and not be surprised. This is hate and violence and killing that is the result of an evil dagger at our throats. And that is people who wake up every day hating other people. But Lawrence, thank you. Lawrence, let me ask you, I mean, domestic terrorism, or should this be a local prosecution? How should this go down?
Domestic terrorists, we should call them white supremacists. I challenged President Obama when he was in office to call radical Islam by his name, and I'm challenging the president to do the same thing when it comes to white supremacists and their terrorism. I think this is a time where we should put the politics aside and call it what it is. When there's moments of terrorism, when there's moments of hate, that is a time for America to unify, and I think that we should be doing just that.
And Chris, you know, going forward as these white nationalists, let's talk about free speech for a moment. They're not going to stop here. Yep. They're going to continue to go around the country. It seems, and the reports are that most of them are from different parts of the country, certainly not Charlottesville. I mean, their First Amendment trumps just about everything else other than violence. And so they'll be able to conduct rallies in other towns and get a federal judge to allow them to do so, as they did last night in the district that Charlottesville is in.
Well, you definitely have the right to free speech, but you do not have the right to incite violence. And it's very clear that these 12 groups came to Charlottesville with the intent to incite riots. So that should go into consideration for any permit they have for assembly in any city around the country, because they are there not just to express their views, which I find vile and repugnant, but of course they have a right to say it, but they are there to incite riot in those communities, and that
Chris,
should not be allowed anywhere.
Chris, everyone agrees with that. If you're there to incite a riot, but if a white nationalist goes to get a permit, and they are not allowed to get a permit based upon the fact that you think they're going to be violent, a federal judge is going to come in and force a community to give them a permit. Am I right, Lawrence?
That's correct, and as they should, because it is the First Amendment. But one thing that I saw that was a flaw in this event is that it turned violent quickly. I mean, this should have been interrupted very quickly. I'm not trying to criticize law enforcement, but it didn't seem like they were prepared for an event like this. And I saw people pushing and punching each other, and they should have been in paddy wagons very quickly, and that didn't happen. So I don't know if that was a failure of leadership or they didn't know that this was going to take place, but that should be something that they should correct quickly. And I would suggest all of these cities that are planning to allow these permits to go out to have a plan before they allow them to do that.
Well, you know, and that is the point. I mean, there didn't seem to be a reason to assume that this was going to be violent. And, you know, law enforcement, it seems, was simply trying to keep the two, you know, sides apart. And, you know, they suffered a loss today, too, whether it's the two individuals, two troopers in the helicopter that was up there to identify dangerous areas. I mean, you know, and you know what? Let's talk about one thing. Let's be straight about one thing, too. Law enforcement in this country for years, from the time I was in law enforcement, I don't know, 10 years ago at this point, I guess, you know, has suffered from all kinds of setbacks, all kinds of budget cutbacks. And so we expect them to all be on the scene of something in a minute with their paddy wagons. Well, let's bulk them up a little. Let's give them what they need.
Well, I think that the next time groups like these have permits in any city around the country, I think law enforcement's going to be ready for whatever they bring. I have a lot of faith in our law enforcement community around this country, and I know they'll do the right thing in these situations, and especially they will learn from the mistakes that happened here in Charlottesville today. These men and women were very brave in facing up these crowds. They were widely outnumbered. And I think in the future you'll see much more preparation for events like these.
You agree, Lawrence?
At the end of the day, just the politicians, the people that we elect into office, got to take the lead. You know, when Steve Scalise, was shot, all these politicians said, hey, we're going to come together. And it only took 2 days before they were back fighting each other, talking, calling names to one another. They were all praying in the Capitol before. And then all of a sudden they dispersed back to their old ways. I need people, the elected officials, not only elected officials, but the pastors, to come together, pray for our nation, and actually do something. Stick with a plan. And I'm not going to say that everything's going to be peaches and cream, but we got to start working on this, because right now the intensity is way too high.
Chris?
Way too high. I agree with Lawrence, and you know what? It's very rare. Lawrence and I have debated a lot. We very rarely are in as much agreement as we are tonight. And I agree with almost everything he said on both this hour and the last hour, because this is a big problem, and it's something that everybody's got to come together and address. I'm happy to give my free advice to anybody who wants me to write a statement for them on this that's all about peace, love, and happiness around this country, because we've got to bring people together. We love our country. We've got to love each other, and that's very important to healing here, and I think that's got to come from the top. You know, and whether it's peace and love, you know, I don't know if we'll ever get to that point, but I have a couple of thoughts. Hate tears at the fabric of a society. And I've seen for so many years murders and assaults and violent crimes that have their genesis in hate. And what we need to do is identify those individuals in Congress who do nothing but backbite each other. And I don't care what party you're in. Get them out. It's time to start all over. It's time for civility back in this country. And just like the right and the left, everybody's got a problem. And now what our job is to do is to at least identify who they are and basically hold them out. So final word, Chris. Final word, Chris. You know, hate is never a way to solve a problem. Instilling fear and violence is never a way to solve a problem. We've got to solve our problems the way we've always solved this problem in America, through our system of government, through our republic, through our democracy.
Civilly.
Let's do that more.
Go ahead, Lawrence. You got a few seconds.
Civilly. You have to be civil. It's okay to have these debates, but be civil and try to accomplish something. Not the debate, just the debate. Get something done.
You know, when I was a DA, I infiltrated these some of these supremacist organizations. I mean, we've got to go back in there and infiltrate and find out what they're doing, who they are. If they're back, we've got to stop them. Lawrence Jones, Chris Hahn, thanks for being with us tonight. And next, more on the growing threat from North Korea and the standoff between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. An expert joins me live next. Right now, Virginia State Police say they've made 3 more arrests related to the white nationalist rally and subsequent violence in Charlottesville, Virginia. That's 4 people in total now arrested. One of them, 20-year-old James Alex Fields, facing murder charges. The other 3 facing lesser charges, including assault and disorderly conduct. More on this developing story as details become available. Meantime, President Trump talking tough, and North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un talking crazy. It's a standoff of potentially historic proportions, and it has everyone asking the question, how does this all end? Joining me now to talk about it is Forbes contributor and author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World, Gordon Chang. All right, good evening, Gordon. Thanks for being with us. My first question, what's happened in the last 12 hours that we need to know about? Has anything changed as we continue to hold our breath in this situation?
Yeah. The Chinese Communist Party media, Global Times, the newspaper, announced China's position on what it will do if the North Koreans attack Guam. But what's fascinating is that the Global Times, announcing Beijing's position, said that if there was a preemptive U.S. attack on North Korea, China would come in on North Korea's side.
Right.
Therefore, making this not just the U.S. versus North Korea, but North Korea and China versus the United States.
All right, so China's not giving us the help that the president had hoped for. What do we do to them to squeeze them?
What we do is we enforce U.S. law, Judge, and that means for Chinese banks that have been money laundering for the North Koreans, including some of the largest Chinese banks, I think we need to declare them primary money laundering concerns under Section 311 of the Patriot Act, and therefore deny them access to their dollar accounts, putting them out of business, especially outside of China. That is going to be important because nobody thinks President Trump has the political will to do it. The Chinese have been holding their breath. And I think that if President Trump actually goes forward, what he will do is he'll frighten the North Koreans, because then he'll understand that Trump means business. And
there's no question in my mind that he does. I think he's just tried all of the avenues, including back channels that we just heard about 24 hours ago. All right, I also want to talk to you about the conversation that I had with Congressman Trent Franks, and specifically as it relates to the EMP, an electromagnetic pulse which could be created by North Korea and shooting off a nuclear device into the atmosphere.
Yes, you have what people have said. One EMP device could perhaps kill as many as 50%, and some people have said 90% of Americans within 6 months.
Right.
Because if we can't get the grid back up, it means all sorts of things can happen, which would just be horrible. So the North Koreans don't need very much in the way of guidance, and they don't need heat shielding at all. Right now, they've got all the elements in place to be able to land a nuke in the U.S. They just haven't integrated it. That'll take them somewhere between 9 months and maybe a year before they can put a nuke on U.S. territory. And also, they've got some really fearsome missiles that they have yet to test. And by the way, some of these missiles look to be Chinese in origin. I think President Trump needs to get behind the microphone and ask the Chinese, how come the North Koreans look like they've got a Chinese arsenal?
Well, do you recall the parade, Gordon, about, I don't know,
April
6, 8 months ago? And it was 12? Is that what you said? When was it?
April 15th.
Oh, well, okay, April, where they showed the ability to shoot an ICBM off a moving vehicle. There was claim that those were made in China. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, well, first of all, you've got Chinese transporter erectors. These are the vehicles that brought the missiles that were fired on July 4th and July 28th, North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missiles. Those are Chinese. But even more worrisome is that North Korea's most advanced missiles, even more advanced than the ones that they tested last month, look to be variants of China's JL-1 submarine-launched missile. I can't prove that the Chinese gave them the plans, but the point is we need to find out, because there is this disturbing trend of all sorts of Chinese equipment showing up in North Korea's inventory. And also, Judge, the Chinese have been helping with semi-processed fissile material, components, and equipment for North Korea's nuclear weapons program. So this is bad news across the board.
And you know what? If the president has the ability to pull the short hairs, maybe it's time to do it. Gordon Chang, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Judge.
All right. And tonight's Street Justice is next. Does all this talk of nuclear war have America on edge? I hit the streets to find out. Don't miss it. That's me. Should we wait for them to hit us? What should we do?
Diplomacy.
You think that wackadoo can talk?
With menopause, I expected hot flashes. But struggling to zip my jeans? I'm not ready for elastic waistbands.
Only Estroven Weight Management helps safely manage weight and relieves hot flashes. Safe, trusted Estroven.
Yes, 9 o'clock works for me. Bye.
Another referral. Our customers love us.